Every morning, before the city fully woke up, Daniel stepped out of his narrow rented room and pulled the door shut behind him with care, too much care, as if noise itself might punish him. The hallway smelled of damp concrete and old dust. A flickering bulb buzzed above, reminding him it could give up at any moment, much like everything else in his life. Daniel walked the same cracked road every day to the factory. The pavement had deep lines in it, scars left by time and neglect. He often thought the road looked the way he felt, used, forgotten, and still expected to carry weight without complaint. At the factory, Daniel worked harder than most. He arrived early, left late, and followed every rule. But effort did not protect him. It never had. When mistakes happened, eyes turned to him first. When tension filled the room, jokes followed, and they always landed on his shoulders. Not loud insults. Those would have been easier. Instead, small cuts. Quiet laughter. Side glances that said, "You don't belong here." Daniel learned early that silence could be armor. Words, once spoken, could be twisted. Defending himself only made things worse. So he nodded. He lowered his gaze. He swallowed everything that burned his throat. "Don't mind him," someone once said behind his back. "He won't say anything." They were right. But not because he had nothing to say. Inside Daniel lived thoughts that could fill books, memories, dreams, questions about who he might have been if life had been gentler. But the world had taught him that speaking cost too much. Silence was cheaper. Safer. During breaks, others gathered in loud circles. Daniel ate alone, sitting on a crate near the loading dock. He watched dust float in sunbeams and wondered how something so small could shine while he felt invisible. When the day finally ended, his body ached, but the ache was familiar. What hurt more was the feeling that tomorrow would be exactly the same. Back in his room, Daniel placed his bag down carefully, as if it carried something fragile, though it didn't. The room was barely big enough for a bed, a chair, and a small table. Paint peeled from the walls like it was trying to escape. The heater barely worked. But it was all he had. There was one thing he loved about that room. The window. It wasn't special. The glass was slightly cracked, and the frame let cold air slip through at night. But it faced the open sky. Daniel would sit beneath it every evening, watching the light fade from blue to purple to black. Sometimes he imagined the stars were listening. On those nights, he allowed himself to speak quietly, carefully. "Just survive today," he would whisper. "Tomorrow might be kinder." He repeated those words like a prayer, though he wasn't sure anyone heard them. Tomorrow rarely changed. The same looks. The same treatment. The same weight pressing down on his chest. Still, Daniel woke up every day. Not because he was strong, but because somewhere deep inside him, something refused to disappear completely. He remembered his mother's voice from long ago, soft but firm. "Your worth is not decided by how people treat you." At the time, he hadn't understood. Now, on his worst nights, he tried to believe it. There were moments, small, almost invisible ones, when hope flickered. A stranger holding a door. A bird singing on a wire. A sunrise that painted the sky in colors too beautiful to feel accidental. Daniel held onto those moments tightly, afraid they might vanish if he didn't. The world around him felt heavy, unforgiving, and sharp at the edges. But Daniel kept moving through it, step by step, day by day. Not loudly. Not proudly. Just steadily. He didn't know it yet, but this quiet endurance, the kind no one applauds, was shaping him. They thought he was weak because he was quiet. They mistook patience for emptiness. They never saw the strength it took to remain kind in a world that gave him every reason not to be. And though they tried again and again to break his spirit, something inside Daniel stayed unbroken. Not loud. Not bold. But alive. And that was enough, for now. The day Daniel lost his job began like every other day, quiet, gray, and heavy with routine. He woke before his alarm, the sky outside still dim, and sat on the edge of his bed longer than usual. His chest felt tight, as if something was waiting to happen. He brushed the feeling aside. Life had taught him not to expect warnings. At the factory, the air felt different. Conversation stopped when he walked past. Eyes avoided his. Papers were stacked too neatly on the supervisor's desk. "Daniel," the supervisor said without looking up, "step inside." The office smelled of stale coffee and cold metal. The door closed behind him with a final sound that echoed louder than it should have. "We're making cuts," the supervisor said. "It's not personal." Daniel nodded. He always nodded. A thin envelope slid across the desk. No apology. No explanation beyond those two words. Not personal. Daniel wanted to ask why his name had been chosen. He wanted to remind them of the overtime hours, the weekends, the loyalty. But the words stayed trapped in his chest. They always did. So he thanked them. That was the moment something truly broke, not his pride, but his certainty. The fragile belief that if he endured quietly long enough, life would eventually soften. Outside, the noise of the city felt overwhelming. Cars passed. People laughed. Time continued moving, careless and fast, while Daniel stood still with an envelope in his hand and nowhere to go. He didn't walk home. Instead, he kept moving, letting his feet decide. Streets blurred together until concrete gave way to dirt paths and tired trees. He ended up at an old park on the edge of town, one most people forgot existed. The swings creaked in the wind. Benches were cracked and tagged with faded paint. The grass grew in uneven patches, stubborn but thin. It felt like a place the world had given up on. Daniel sat on a bench and stared at the ground. Hunger crept in slowly, then all at once. But hunger was familiar. What frightened him more were the thoughts that followed. Maybe they were right. Maybe you really don't matter. Maybe this is all you'll ever be. His hands trembled. Not from the cold but from the fear that he might finally believe those thoughts. As the sun dipped lower, Daniel noticed something near the bench. A small rusted can, half buried in dirt. Inside it, bright flowers bloomed yellow and purple, alive against all odds. Someone, probably a child, had planted them there. Daniel leaned closer. The soil was cracked and dry. There was no reason those flowers should have survived. And yet, they had. He felt something shift inside him. "If you can grow here," he whispered, voice barely steady, "maybe I can too." That night, Daniel didn't sleep much. He returned to his room with empty pockets and a heavier heart. He sat beneath the window, staring at the sky, no longer whispering prayers, only questions. What now? The next days were harder than he expected. Job rejections came quickly, if they came at all. His savings vanished faster than he could track. Pride dissolved into necessity. One afternoon, he stood in line at a community kitchen, head down, hands clenched. Shame burned hotter than hunger. But when his turn came, the volunteer smiled at him, not politely, but genuinely. "Glad you're here," she said. Those 3 words stayed with him. Glad you're here. No one had said that to him in a long time. Daniel began coming back, not just for food, but to help. He washed dishes, swept floors, carried boxes. No one asked about his past. No one judged his silence. He wasn't important there. But he wasn't invisible either. Slowly, the silence that had crushed him before began to feel different. It wasn't empty anymore. It was space to breathe, to think, to heal. Daniel still didn't know where his life was going. But for the first time in a long while, he knew this. Even when everything fell silent, hope was still there, waiting to be chosen. Daniel's days no longer followed a schedule, but they followed a purpose, quiet, unannounced, and unseen. He began waking early, not because he had somewhere to be, but because the mornings felt honest. The city was softer then. Less demanding. He would step outside and breathe deeply, reminding himself that he was still here. That counted for something. At the community kitchen, Daniel did whatever was needed. He washed dishes until his hands wrinkled and sore. He mopped floors long after others had gone home. When asked why he helped so much, he shrugged. "It keeps my hands busy," he said. But the truth was deeper. Helping gave shape to his days. It reminded him that he could still contribute, still matter, even without a job title or paycheck. On his walk home each evening, Daniel stopped by the forgotten park. He picked up trash others ignored. He wiped dirt from benches. One day, he brought water for the flowers in the rusted can. The colors seemed brighter afterward, as if grateful. No one noticed. And that was okay. There were still hard moments. Nights when doubt crept back in, whispering that this was just another way to stay invisible. Nights when he stared at the ceiling, wondering how long hope could survive without proof. But each morning, he chose to try again. Daniel helped an elderly man carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs. He held doors open longer than necessary. He listened when people needed to talk, even when they didn't realize it. One afternoon at the kitchen, a young volunteer asked him, "Why do you keep coming back?" The question caught him off guard. Daniel dried his hands slowly and thought before answering. He didn't want to lie. He also didn't want to sound wise. So he told the truth. "Because hope needs practice," he said. "If you don't use it, it fades." The word surprised him too. From that day on, small changes followed. People began greeting him by name. Someone saved him a seat. Another asked for his help fixing a broken shelf. None of it was dramatic, but it mattered. Daniel realized something important: the world hadn't suddenly become kinder. He had. By choosing hope, even when no one was watching, he was reshaping the way he moved through life. One evening, as he finished cleaning the park, a child stopped and watched him. "Why do you clean this place?" the child asked. Daniel smiled. "Because it deserves care," he replied. The child nodded seriously, as if understanding more than words could explain. As Daniel walked home that night, he felt lighter. Not because his problems were gone, but because they no longer defined him. He was still quiet. Still unnoticed by many. Still struggling. But he was no longer broken. Hope had become something active, not a wish, but a choice. One made daily, patiently, and without applause. And though Daniel didn't know it yet, the world was beginning slowly to notice the change. Change did not arrive with applause. It came quietly, like most meaningful things in Daniel's life. One morning, Daniel noticed a woman standing at the edge of the park, watching him as he wiped down a bench. She wasn't in a hurry. She wasn't on her phone. She was simply observing. "Do you work for the city?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "No." "Then why do you take care of this place?" He paused, rag still in his hand. "Because someone should." The woman introduced herself as a local journalist. She had noticed the park slowly changing, cleaner, brighter, alive again. People were coming back. Children played. Elderly neighbors sat on benches that once felt unsafe. "And you did this?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. "I just helped." A week later, an article appeared. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't paint him as a hero. It simply told the truth: a quiet man chose to care when no one else did. The response surprised him. People stopped him on the street. They thanked him. Some apologized awkwardly, briefly, for how they had once ignored him. But Daniel didn't hold on to resentment. He had learned that bitterness weighed more than forgiveness. Soon, community groups reached out. They asked for his help restoring other forgotten spaces. A nonprofit offered him work, not charity, but trust. Daniel read the offer letter 3 times, hands shaking. This time, when he nodded, it was with certainty. At meetings, people listened when he spoke. His words were still soft, but they carried weight now. Not because he had changed his voice, but because he had changed his belief in himself. One evening, he returned to the factory road he once walked with his head down. The building looked smaller than he remembered. He realized something then. They had never broken him. They had only delayed him. Daniel wasn't angry. He was grateful for the pain that shaped him, for the silence that taught him strength, and for the hope that refused to leave. The park glowed behind him, filled with laughter and life. For the first time, the world wasn't just passing him by. It was finally looking back. The morning sun rose over the city, painting the streets with a warm glow that contrasted sharply with the years of struggle that still lingered in Michael's mind. He stood at the threshold of his new office, a space he had dreamed of for decades but never dared to imagine he would actually command. The view from the large windows displayed a bustling skyline, a symbol not just of the city's ambition but of his own unyielding journey. Michael's phone buzzed with messages, congratulatory notes from mentors, former colleagues, and friends who had witnessed his resilience. But among the flood of notifications, one stood out, a message from Clara. It was simple, yet profound. "You made it? Just as I always knew you would." He smiled, feeling the warmth of her unwavering belief, a light that had guided him through the darkest nights. The past few years had been a whirlwind. He had faced countless moments where surrender seemed easier than the fight. Moments where the weight of judgment, prejudice, and doubt threatened to crush him entirely. But every time, he remembered the spark of hope that had refused to die. He remembered the faces of those who had doubted him, the whispers of ridicule that had once followed him down crowded streets. And he remembered the small victories, the moments when he proved to himself, quietly but insistently, that he was unstoppable. Michael walked through the office, his footsteps echoing against the polished floors. The walls were adorned with accolades, yes, but more importantly, with reminders of his journey, photographs of the community projects he had spearheaded, letters of gratitude from young men who had looked up to him, and the countless sketches and plans that had once been nothing more than fragments of ambition. Each item told a story of persistence, courage, and unrelenting hope. He paused in front of a framed photo of himself taken years ago, the day he had first stood up to those who had mocked and dismissed him. The boy in the picture looked timid, uncertain, but his eyes held a fire that no amount of cruelty could extinguish. Michael traced the outline of his own face, a smile tugging at his lips. He realized that the journey had not been about proving them wrong, it had been about proving to himself that he could rise, again and again, no matter the obstacles. The office door opened behind him, and Clara stepped in. She carried 2 cups of coffee, her presence a reminder of the love and support that had anchored him through turbulent times. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes glinting with pride. "I'm more than okay," Michael said, taking the cup she offered. "I'm here. We're here." He gestured around the room, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had built together. They sat by the window, watching the city awaken. For the first time in years, Michael allowed himself to breathe fully, to let go of the tension that had lived in his shoulders for so long. The fear, the doubt, the pain, they were all part of his story, but they no longer controlled him. Hope had carried him, unwavering and patient, through every storm. And now, standing on the other side, he felt a clarity he had never known before, the realization that the human spirit is capable of extraordinary endurance when fueled by belief and determination. News of Michael's achievements spread far beyond the city. Invitations to speak, to mentor, to inspire came pouring in. But he remained grounded, remembering the countless faces he had encountered along the way, faces that had doubted, scorned, or ignored him. Each of them had contributed to the strength that now defined him. One afternoon, he returned to the neighborhood where his journey had begun. Children played on the streets, their laughter echoing through the alleys. Michael knelt down to speak to a young boy who reminded him of himself. "Never let anyone tell you what you can't do," he said, voice steady and kind. "There will be challenges. There will be people who doubt you. But hope will carry you farther than you can imagine." As he walked away, Michael felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been long, and the wounds of the past had been real, but they had not defined him. He had faced every obstacle, endured every hardship, and emerged not just unbroken but unstoppable. That evening, back in his office, he looked out over the city lights, reflecting on the path that had led him here. Hope had been his constant companion, the quiet force that refused to let him give up. And now, as he watched the world below, he knew that his story was not just his own, it was a testament to everyone who had ever faced doubt and despair. Michael lifted his coffee cup in a silent toast to the journey, to hope, and to the unyielding spirit within. He had been tested, broken, and rebuilt, and in the end, he had become unstoppable. And with that, he stepped into the future, ready for whatever challenges awaited, carrying the unshakable truth that no force on earth could extinguish the power of hope.